I've been working on some new sewable, crochetable scales or leaves. Leafy scales. But not like the last two leafy scales that I've made. I wanted to try a leaf with a non-serrated edge. Now the first leaf I made could bend, so it had a more three-dimensional shape, which I really like. The second one did not bend. The reason I made this one unbendable was to make the fitting of the gem easier. When I started this new scale, first I made sure the printed product would actually fit the gems I wanted to use perfectly. I like to do tiny test prints for this. It saves a bit of PLA and lots of time. It turns out that despite my very accurate measurements with my very accurate measuring tools, one of the sockets was a bit off, but I got it the second time round. Now I wanted this new scale to bend down the middle, and also accommodate a gem, or three. If I made it so it could bend, the seat for the gem would change shape. So I had to change the angle of either side of the seat, like this. So after it's bent into shape, there's a nice flat surface for the gem to sit on. I couldn't be bothered to do that last time, but this time I put in a bit more effort. I also had to make it just a little bit thicker so that I wouldn't have too big an empty slit down the middle. Then I had to test it to make sure it was actually going to bend to the angle I wanted and leave a flat enough seat that the gem would sit flush against it, which it did. I made a few variations and ended up with 3 different leaf designs. One with gem sockets, going from small to big, one going from big to small, and one with no sockets. I didn't know which of the gemmed variants I wanted, so I did a mock-up of each and posted a short. By popular demand, I made the big to small gem version of the scale. I was actually going to print out some of the leaf scales with no gem sockets as well, but I completely forgot. It was a busy week. So I ended up with loads of scales with gem sockets instead. It's not all bad, it just means I'm going to make something extra sparkly. I also used this gradient filament so I'd get leaves of all different colors. I painted the veins in the previous leaves I made. I didn't do that for these ones. They're shiny enough already. When I print these scales flat, they never come out completely smooth. So I had to sand them, all the way from 150 grit to 600 grit. Now for the gluing. When I glued the ghost leaves, I bound them with thread to keep them in that bent position. I think this was excessively time-consuming and wasteful. So I came up with another way of gluing batches of these scales and keeping them in shape while they dried. After gluing them down the middle, I just slipped them between a perfectly spaced clamp. Since the sides of these scales are smooth, the scales endured this process well. I think if you did this with the serrated edge version, the points of the serrated edge might get damaged, especially with a clamp like this. You'd need some padding to protect them. After the gluing process, the scales were still dull from the sanding, so I laid them all out and gave them 2 coats of gloss varnish. The varnish really brought that shininess back. Lastly, the gems needed to be added. When I got these gems, I bought a bag of mixed-sized gems. There were 7 different sizes in here, so I separated them, which, since there were only slight differences between the sizes, especially the smaller gems, this process took a bit of extra attention and lots of time. Then I just laid out the scales and glued in the gems. I really like how the gems change colour as you turn the scales. Since I've crocheted with scales before, I thought this would be pretty simple, but because of the positioning of the gems, it required more trial and error to make sure the sparkliness was not obscured. Here, I'm crocheting the scales so that there are 2 empty rows of single crochet between each row of scales. There is no space between each scale, they're just being added, one right next to the other. I think the scales are too crowded in this one. So here I tried leaving a 3-row space between each row of scales. This is a little better, but I think they could still do with more space on either side. So I tried leaving a 2-row space between each row of scales, and a single crochet between each scale. I don't know why I went back to the 2-row space, because the extra width doesn't make the vertical crowding any less crowded. So lastly, I left a 3-row space between each row of scales, and a single crochet between each scale. This looks better. And I made an upside down triangle bag. This is a modified pattern for a triangle. Normally you would do 1 increase either side of the triangle every row, or every other row. But I needed an increase of 5 stitches between each row of scales, so incorporated that extra increase on alternating sides to prevent the piece from becoming warped. I think it turned out okay. I crocheted both sides of the bag as one piece, but I did not crochet the tip of the triangle on the back side. I imagined that little bits of things would get lost and stuck down there if the bottom of the bag was pointed. This bag has a little button to keep it closed, on the opposite side of where you'd expect it. I like to think of it as a security feature, completely intentional. It's a hip pouch, so I crocheted a strap to fasten this round my waist with. I chose this pattern as the gaps can also be used as buttonholes, so it's a nice adjustable strap. I attached a button to one side of the strap Here's the finished bag. And here's what it looks like being worn.